Welcome to Season 2 of ADHD Difference. I'm your host, Julie Legg, ADHD advocate, author of The Missing Piece, a woman's guide to understanding, diagnosing and living with ADHD, and an unapologetic doer of many things. This season, we're turning up the volume with a global lineup of brilliant guests, bringing their lived experiences, insights, research, strategies and resources. And of course, along with a healthy dose of humour and humility. Whether you're neurodivergent yourself or just curious, there's something here for every curious brain. Let's dive in. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Alise Murray to the podcast. Alise is a clinical psychologist, life coach, and creator of the Prior 10 life management system. She brings over 20 years of experience coaching adults with ADHD, along with a background as a therapist for highly sensitive people. Her work blends practical, brain-friendly strategies and compassion for the emotional realities of ADHD and a real reassurance, the reminder that you're not broken and you're not alone. Welcome to the show, Alise.
Thank you so much, Julie. Pleasure to be here.
Yay. I'm going to dive straight into these questions. Now, you've spent more than 20 years coaching adults with ADHD, and so you bring a rich background as a therapist for highly sensitive people. So I'd love to know what first drew you into this work and your own relationship with ADHD.
Yeah. Well, as far as my own relationship with it, I do not have ADHD. I strongly suspect that I have two immediate family members who do. Their children do, and so I would suspect. But although I am a highly sensitive person, and I've been quite open with that on the internet. So when I first learned about the concept of high sensitivity and sensory processing sensitivity, I was like, wow, this is rich. This is really helpful. But my interest in ADHD really began when the first two jobs that I had after completing my studies. I worked two part-time jobs, and one job was as a university professor. And so I had students coming during office hours. I was advising students, and a lot of those students, as you can imagine, were saying, I am having a really hard time keeping on top of my schoolwork and my other obligations. And the other part-time job I had was working as a medical psychologist in a unit for folks a lot of whom had experienced mild traumatic brain injury and concussions and that sort of thing. And so, not specifically ADHD, but very, very similar because, typically impacting the same area of the brain. And so I was working with them, providing education to families. And so it just really kind of naturally forged into, and this was before I started my private practice, but it just really naturally forged into, wow, I just love this, the challenges that are overlapping between both of these groups of folks that I was working with.
I was going to ask you too about the highly sensitive people. Can you tell me what that means and how often you see that in your line of work?
Yeah, it's technically called sensory processing sensitivity. It's not a disorder. It's just it's a characteristic. But most people just call it high sensitivity or HSP, and I believe it's around 20%. I haven't looked at those statistics for a while. Maybe not quite that high, but it's approaching 20% of the population. And it basically means when somebody is highly sensitive interpersonally as well as in a sensory capacity. So being sensitive, for instance, to noise, to bright lights, to odors. Not everybody is sensitive to all of these things, but also being highly sensitive to interpersonal inputs. So
Mm.
typically folks with high sensitivity, they tend to be quite creative individuals, quite empathic individuals, but they kind of soak up other people's feelings like a sponge, and so that can be problematic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very overwhelming, not only dealing with your own, but other people's as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, definitely. There are some other little things too, like caffeine sensitivity often goes with it, pain sensitivity. Yeah, yeah, just more of a reaction to these things. And so uh, I quite enjoy working with folks with high sensitivity because it's typically when they come to see me, and it is fairly common, folks will come to see me and they feel ashamed. They've been told in their life, you're hypersensitive, you need to get a thicker skin, that sort of thing. But when they learn that, no, this is an actual thing, it's a
Mm.
genetically based trait. Nothing in psychology is strictly genetic, but there's a genetic basis for it. And across not just humans, but across hundreds of species, that there's a percentage that is similar, that has this. And just learning that this is not evidence that you're broken. It's something just to be aware of and to plan for so that you're not feeling constantly overwhelmed. And you
Mm.
can use the gifts that come with it instead. And I think with ADHD too, that there are wonderful qualities with ADHD. And similarly, folks will come to me, and there's a lot of feeling overwhelmed, feeling shame, because a lot of criticism from folks. If you just try harder, if you just apply
Mm.
yourself, all
Mm.
these things. And then learning, there are actually wonderful things about being wired the way that you are. It's just a matter of trying to maximize goodness of fit.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you about the impact of challenges like rejection, sensitivity, and anxiety and
Hmm.
depression alongside ADHD. And why do you
Hmm.
think that those emotional layers often travel so much hand in hand with ADHD too? What helps people begin to untangle all of these different elements as a
Hmm.
package?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and also that a lot of folks uh, who believe that they have ADHD, having anxiety, having depression can make it difficult to direct your attention. It can cause some of the difficulties that we see with ADHD. So there's overlap there. And some of those folks
Mm.
you know, may not have ADHD, but it's like, no, I mean, we definitely can talk about strategies that will help you. But it gets puzzling for folks when they're trying to figure out what exactly is going on.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, very, very often with ADHD, we do see an emotional component, like rejection, sensitivity. For instance, I think a big part of that is that it's been estimated that obviously we have no direct data, but it's been estimated that folks experience, by the time they become adults, they've experienced 6 times as much criticism as somebody who is not affected with ADHD. Just constantly getting this feedback that, you
Mm.
need to do things differently. And so I think that it's quite adaptive if you're a child and you grow up hearing these things all the time, that you're going to be very vigilant, for signs that other people are going to, criticize me, or they're going to pull back. They're going to decide that they don't want to hang out with me or whatever. And then when starting to experience something that might be rejection, then feeling like, oh my gosh, it's happening again. I think that's
Mm.
part of it. But I think also because with ADHD, I mean, as we all know, it's not that you can't pay attention, it's that you can pay attention exquisitely well, but it's like directing your attention where you want it to go at will is where the challenge is. And
Yeah.
so, we all know about hyperfocus. And so if somebody says, I think we should see other people, I mean, I think everybody is going to experience the pain of that. Even if you were thinking that, yeah, this relationship is kind of on the rocks, still nobody likes to hear that. But when you have ADHD, it's just so likely that you can just focus on that and go over and over in your head about, oh my gosh, what that means and the impact of that and what is it about me, and trying to understand it and make sense of it. And it's just overwhelming, feeling like you've been punched in the stomach,
Mm,
whereas other
mm,
folks might kind of quickly go to, looking at it a little bit differently. And it's painful, but okay, what's my next step?
mm,
I think with ADHD, a lot of times there's like, I want to really deeply, look at all the angles of this, and it's just
mm.
overwhelming.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear about some of your current passions or projects that you're working on. And now you've
Hmm.
created the Prior 10 Life Management System. I'd like to
Hmm.
hear about that. And you coach and support adults navigating real world ADHD challenges like time management and productivity and self esteem. Tell me about your management system and what's exciting you most in your work right now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and of course, my system is not just for folks with ADHD. Folks, anybody who is really feeling overwhelmed, and feeling like I really need to figure out how to be able to navigate life in a more satisfactory way, which I think that applies to a lot of us. But I think particularly folks with ADHD have told me that they have tried and felt like I can't do it with various systems for being able to plan, being able to organize, that these things have
Mm,
not worked for them because, the kinds of what I've noticed is that quite often the systems that folks put out there and set up, these are people who are just naturally extremely left-brained and linear anyway. And they just sort of act like, well, yeah, you just do this, 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 and then, problem solved. And, when you are not wired that way, it's like you don't get it. If I label my files and I put them, in this system, I mean, good luck. I mean, I find them again. I mean, thank goodness for digital systems where you can do a search and frantically search over and over. What did I call it again? But, at least there's that. But be able to find things around the house. And I mean, we don't get into too much of that with Prior 10, but it's, it kind of dovetails into it. Just that so many of the things that, are laid out in these kinds of productivity systems, organizational systems, they're just not really thinking that, hey, I mean, not everybody is going to be able to do this
mm,
optimally because their brains are not organized in that way. So, I mean, it's like asking someone who's left-handed, it's like, just keep practicing with the right hand. I mean, yeah, maybe you can do it, but is that really fair? I mean, why not, do things left-handed and celebrate that and, work with that. So with Prior 10, I mean, that's part of it. And then also I just recognize that a big thing that's lacking is that, being able to figure out things like what do I need to do when, and how do I keep track of the different responsibilities that I have. Obviously, that's important, but there's so much more to it than that. There's also looking at things like, well, what if I'm not motivated to do it? I mean, what if I have this plan and then I sit down and I'm just like, I do not want to do this at all. you know, or I'm getting distracted and I find, I start doing this and then, squirrel, I'm doing something else. Or I thought I finished it, but it's not done. What? Like I missed a detail, like they're just a lot of psychological factors, and particularly being able to communicate not only to be able to kind of think about what are reasonable limits for myself so that I can really pour my energy into what's important to me, but also how do I express that to other people without, being afraid that they're going to say that I'm bitchy or demanding or whatever. How do I communicate in a way where I'm more likely to get results and I can say, this is what I can do. I'm sorry, I can't do this, however, and feel confident about that. That I just feel like in a lot of the productivity space, they don't really get into the emotional part of all of this, which is huge.
That's that is so true. I Something sparked in my mind about you were talking before about just not feeling up to doing things, not
Hmm.
having that energy, bringing that to the table.
Hmm.
I remember as a teenager thinking I was very, very clever, and uh, we didn't have a television in the house, so there wasn't a default to go and watch
Mm.
television. So for me, on rainy days, I'd write this big list. If it's raining, this is what I will do. And I wrote down
Mm.
everything from skipping 100 steps to reading a book to writing poetry, playing my guitar, huge big list. So I was never stuck.
Mm.
But come
Mhm.
a rainy day, I would look at the list. Nothing inspired me. And I couldn't wrap my head
Mhm.
around why that was the case. Because in my mind, I'd covered every possible option, but actually, I just didn't
Mm.
have the energy. And maybe for me, that novelty factor wasn't there because everything on my list was proven and done and just part of a
Mhm.
routine. And I needed something else to spark
Mhm.
me in a direction. Interesting how our wonderful
Absolutely.
brains work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I talk with my folks with ADHD about, when we're developing, and a lot of the folks that I've worked with, I mean, they have actively resisted any effort to plan, because they've just had bad experiences with it. And so when we gradually start putting together, because it's not cookie cutter, but there are certain elements where I say, okay, we need to, address this, we need to address that. And we put things together and we start to do that. And then they start to get excited about the results they're getting. I say, okay, now not to be a wet blanket, but the chances are excellent that in a month or so, you might be like not wanting to do it and baffled about why you don't want to do it because it's
Mm.
been working so well. So, and it's because your brain needs to wake up. So let's talk about some things you could do when that starts to happen because oftentimes it's just a little tweak. It's like not everybody is going to want to do this, but I often, I often use like a bullet journal system, not strictly speaking a bullet journal, but I'll sort of create my own way of planning on paper as I go. I personally do a combination of digital and paper planning, and I just work with people about what is comfortable for you. But something as simple as okay, I'm really getting bored with this. Let me just turn it this way now instead of holding the book this way. Let me just lay out my planning this way. Bang, the brain is awake. Or let me use a different color pen. Just any little thing where it's like, okay, now you got my attention. Now this is more fun. Can make a big difference. And it's not something to get on your own case about. It's like, no, I just have this amazing creative brain that just needs a little shot to wake it up here and there.
That sounds a great strategy. And I was going to ask you about strategies too. You often blend practical, brain-friendly strategies with compassion for the ADHD experience for your clients. Is there one strategy or something that you refer back to, whether it's for yourself or for your clients, that helps cut through, let's say, overwhelm?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing that I do come back to over and over with folks that just really resonates is just the idea that you can't possibly have a richly rewarding life without disappointing others from time to time.
Mm,
That it
mm,
is going to happen with a fair degree of regularity. And so shifting your mindset from looking at how can I try to make everybody happy? How can I avoid disappointing others, which, of course, is bound to get you feeling overwhelmed because it can't be done. Uh, Instead looking at how do I master the art of disappointing others gracefully, disappointing them with respect for them and with clear communication so that, we understand one another. That looking at it in that way is so important. And so, yeah, I think just kind of accepting, like, okay, this is another one of those situations where I'm going to be disappointing someone. So let me shift gears into how to disappoint them in a way that honors them and honors me.
I personally can struggle with that after being a people pleaser for so long,
Hmm.
adding masking to that over decades.
Yeah.
I really, I'm getting better now, but difficult situation to say no. It feels rude saying no. It feels not just like I'm disappointing someone, but I'm a ruthless person, because in the past I would have said yes, yes, yes. And I'm almost contradicting myself by speaking my truth. So I love the idea to be able to say it with grace and respect, yet still get your thoughts across. And it's for our own health and well-being that we say no occasionally
Hmm.
or more than occasionally if that works for us. So no, really interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So Elise, with your prior 10 system,
Hmm.
what else is happening in that space?
Well, I'm really excited that in early 2026, we're going to be starting an 8-week group coaching program called Stand. And my reason for developing this was because, for one thing, of course, I love teaching, being a former professor, but the big reason is because just there weren't enough spots, for the one-on-one coaching. And also,
Mm.
I think that it can be really helpful to have accountability from other folks who are going through this alongside you. So it's going to be like an 8-week group coaching program. We're going to be looking at the planning aspect of the prior 10 life management system, but as well as we're going to be working on that authentic communication piece, being able
Mm.
to master that art of disappointing others gracefully and being able to deal with motivation and attention and the different things that can cause us to get off track so that we can really focus our time and energy around what's most important to us rather than just feeling like you're in a batting cage and you're constantly like dealing with problems. Living a life that is really more focused around what's important to you. So I'm very excited about that.
And Elise, is that in person or online?
That's going to be online.
Great.
So yeah, so we'll be having Zoom meetings. We will be, and of course, if people can't attend the Zoom meeting, there will be replays. There will be emails to offer helpful suggestions, co-working time that's optional. So yeah, just a number of different ways to be able to group chat to be able to get support through this as you're learning the system.
Sounds great. For someone who is listening who might feel sort of weighed down by ADHD, you, these cycles of shame, whether it's
Mhm.
missed deadlines or just feeling that they're not enough or just stuck, what would you
Mhm.
most want them to hear?
I think it's just so important to remember that the things that we criticize ourselves for are that there is strength hidden within
Mhm.
those things. That I first started to consider this when I read a book by Thomas Leonard, the coach, and he where he talked about I read this passage where he said, my biggest fault is that, and he had it in capital letters drawn way out. He said, I am way too sensitive to other people's, opinions, reactions, that sort of thing. And that caught my attention, but he said, that I've come to realize that this is also the source of my greatest strength because at first I would be ashamed of it, being a man and being so sensitive and that sort of thing. But he said, I've learned to manage it and I've learned to appreciate it because um, I can tune right in to what people want and need in ways that a lot of other people can't because I can pick up on it. And I have found that to be absolutely true too. And I think it's not just with sensitivity, but I think quite often we don't stop and think about yes, this is frustrating. Yes, I wish that, things went more smoothly for me in this respect, in this respect. But also, what are the hidden strengths? Let me stop and
Mm.
think about that because quite often they're there. We just haven't discovered them yet. Like I can never remember his name, but the guy who started Kinko's in the States. I don't know if you're familiar with Kinko's, but Kinko's is like um, they had like photocopying and shipping and services like that where you'd go in. And he started that business when he was quite young. He was in his 20s, I think, but he started that business because he had a job that bored him to tears. When the boss wasn't looking, he would wander off and he would go down the little strip mall and just talk with other people, other business people, and just ask them, how's business? And they would tell him their frustrations, and the wheels started to turn where he was thinking creatively about, so if they had a one stop where they could get all these things done, you know, that could really be amazing. And they could buy supplies while they're there and all that, And so he said, if it weren't for my ADHD and my tendency to get incredibly bored easily, and, that's really the source of my creativity when I get really bored. And so he said, if I hadn't been wired like that, if I had been perfectly content to have this dull little desk job, then I wouldn't have started Kinko's. And, I think that it's absolutely true. I love working with my clients because so often they are just so creative. And, when you can channel that brilliance and not see it as, oh, why am I so scattered and everything? It's like, no, 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 there is strength there. It's amazing. So it's both. I mean, I'm not trying to minimize that. Yes, it's frustrating too,
Mm.
but, because I hear that, but also, don't ignore the strength because I think that, as children, we grow up hearing about the liability part of it. We don't hear about the strength part of it, you know?
And I think to stop being scared of ourselves too, because
Yes.
we've got amazing qualities, and
Yeah.
our challenges shouldn't weigh us down like an
Mhm.
anchor in a bad way. When it could be quite freeing, just and liberating to be ourselves and shine brightly with our strengths. I love
Absolutely.
I love your chat on boredom. I think, boredom's the word's very interesting. I get scared of boredom, but actually what it
Yeah.
is, it's a moment. It's only momentary because something will snap in and I will come up with a new idea or find something that interests me. So it's only temporary. Boredom doesn't last
Hmm.
forever. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's an interesting pause between, nothingness and doing something quite brilliant.
Yeah.
Um,
It's like when you go for a walk, so often it's recommended that we go for a walk during the workday. And when you start the walk, I mean, typically it's boring. You're walking like, all right, I've been down this road before, and that sort of thing. But then in no time, your mind just starts to, pick up on that sensory input and the physical movement, and you just start to get these really amazing, imaginative ideas. So it's just like sticking with it, you know. I mean, if we
Mm.
just start walking for 2 minutes and say, ugh, and then go home and look at our phone, it's like, then we missed the opportunity. So it's like riding out the boredom just a little bit, and then oftentimes the treasure comes.
Oh, that's brilliant. And what a great way to end our chat. So thank you so much for your time. Details about your prior 10 will be in the show notes for our listeners to go and check out and to connect with you. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure, Julie.